I don't know about you, but these past few months, I've been doing a lot of online food ordering for pickup. I'm blessed to have a spouse who loves to cook and is terrific at it, but there have been times I've had to order something for lunch or dinner. I've noticed there can be a lot of choices on these online menus. Each item has various ways you can customize it. So you can choose to add things you like and eliminate others you don't. For instance, I can click on the toppings I want for a Fellini's pizza, or I can eliminate onions from a Jason's Deli salad. It's very easy to do, but sometimes it can get very confusing and complicated. One time I ordered a chicken club salad from Jason's Deli and chose to eliminate bacon. However, I was ordering it on my iPhone while walking in Piedmont Park, wearing my mask, of course, and didn't realize I had in fact selected the no chicken club salad. After I picked it up, imagine my chagrin when I got home. Why is it called a chicken club salad if it has no chicken? Anyway, it was my fault. I didn't select properly. Usually it's easy to pick and choose what you want when you order something like that, but it can be confusing and complicated, at least for me. When we read this text from Matthew 10, I have to be honest, sometimes I wish we could pick and choose from Jesus's sayings. What are we going to do with this Jesus? He comforts us and gives us hope in one breath, and in the next he asks something of us that just seems impossible. It can be very confusing and complicated. In verse 5 of Matthew 10, before today's reading, Jesus is sending his disciples out, first teaching them, warning them of persecution. And this teaching continues on through the chapter to our reading, which starts with a puzzling comment that a disciple is not above the teacher, nor a slave above the master. That word slave is terribly disturbing to us. Why would Jesus blithely use slavery as an example? Well, they say he's recognizing the social order of his times, teacher and disciple, master and slave, which, though abhorrent to us, was a matter of everyday life at the time. These were hard and fast distinctions. It goes on to say it's enough for the disciple to be like the teacher, the slave like the master. In other words, slaves and disciples are expected to fulfill their roles so that they can at least behave like their masters and teachers. They should aspire to improve themselves. But even so, they'll run into that societal barrier. It's not like he's approving this, he's just saying this is how it was. But what's his point? Why is he saying this? Well, Jesus's enemies have been attacking him, calling him names, Beelzebul, demon, in order to sideline him as his influence grows. The religious elite are trying to paint Jesus in negative tones to try to get the people to turn away from him. We can certainly see this sort of name calling in our own political and public arena today. And Jesus is saying, if they're calling me Beelzebul, how much more will they malign those of his household? In other words, you guys, my disciples, you're in for some persecution and not just name calling. So beware. He continues, have no fear of them, for nothing is covered up that will not be uncovered, nothing secret that will not become known. These hypocritical religious leaders will have their day. They will be judged, so there's no reason to fear them. They are powerless in the light of God's truth. Okay, this is kind of scary. I'm not sure I want to check this selection on Jesus's menu. And yet, in the past weeks, with the Black Lives Matter protests after the killings of George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, many others, the cover is being ripped off America's systemic racism. We hope God's light of justice is starting to shine through the cracks. Jesus tells his disciples, what I say to you in the dark, you tell in the light. What you hear whispered, shout it from the housetops. Don't be cowed by those who seek to persecute you. Go all out in proclaiming what you know to be true about Jesus. Wow, is this relevant or what? Some of you have done just this in the past few weeks in Atlanta, shouting justice from the housetops on the streets. Jesus continues encouraging his disciples not to fear. Don't fear those who kill the body and can't kill the soul. Rather, fear the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. Keep your perspective. Don't fear the enemy. When you're called names, or worse, tear gassed, beaten, whatever, remember whose side you are on, the side of light and truth and justice. Well, Jesus finishes this menu item by pointing out that sparrows are cheap in the marketplace, but God knows whenever one sparrow falls to the ground. God knows the number of hairs on your head. God knows us inside out. God knows our hearts. God cares for us intimately and omnisciently. So do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows. A few weeks ago, my spouse, Dan, went to our little ramshackle cabin in Western North Carolina while I stayed in Atlanta to work. He put out a bird feeder and sprinkled some seed around the deck outside the big sliding glass doors of the living room there because we love to watch the variety of birds come and eat. One late night while in bed, he heard heavy rummaging around on the deck. When he got up the next morning, he found the bird feeder ripped down, opened up and empty, and the bag of bird seed out there ripped open and mostly eaten. What he didn't realize alone in the cabin was that black bears were starting their springtime foraging. Black bears love bird seed. The next evening at dusk, lo and behold, that bear came back looking for more seed. It ran around the yard outside, digging into the birdseed sack it had hauled off. Dan took pictures, so I know he wasn't hallucinating. Sure enough, it came back the next evening, hungry again. Dan contacted the state wildlife office, and they said bears memorize where they found food, so ditch that bird feeder until winter. And Boo Boo Bear never came back. Even so, it was a bit terrifying. And those poor, cute little birds aren't getting their seed from us for a while, sadly. But God knew that, and God makes provision otherwise, I'm sure. And Jesus says we are much more valuable than birds and even bears. So I love this image, God loving me more than sparrows, counting my hairs, caring for me so I don't need to be afraid. I'm going to check that one on my order. I do like that. Then Jesus continues his teaching. Everyone, therefore, who acknowledges me before others, I will acknowledge before my Father in heaven, and whoever denies me before others, I will also deny before my Father in heaven. That's a little scary too. This is one of the things that I want to uncheck on my order because it sounds pretty serious. So we've been in social distancing and mask wearing mode. How are we supposed to do this anyway? How do we acknowledge Jesus in our everyday lives? Well, I've been wearing an Episcopal shield face mask. Is that enough of a witness? No, honestly, I'm afraid not. The pandemic has seemed to have brought out the best in some people and the worst in others, and it's only getting more divided. And then we have these tragic racist murders and attacks to stand up against. Which side will you be on? Will you select this call of Jesus on your order and be one of the followers of Jesus who try to live out their lives in service to Jesus, making him known, shouting his love from the housetops or the streets? I live in Midtown, and every night during the first couple of months of the pandemic, at the 8 o'clock shift change, people would go out on their balconies and patios and shout and cheer and ring bells and flash lights to honor the medical professionals and first responders who were sacrificing so much to serve those who had fallen to coronavirus. It was magnificent. They were shouting from the housetops. Why can't we? How might we do that? I hope you'll prayerfully think about that. Well, then Jesus really gets to meddling, and I want to uncheck these next verses, just too hard and tough. What Jesus isn't bringing peace to the earth, but Lord, that's what we need right now. Jesus has come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. He's covering all the relationships we treasure. And one's foes will be members of one's own household. Doesn't Jesus realize we've been hunkered down with all these family members for weeks and weeks, and he's setting us against them? Well, some of us have experienced this, whether in the pandemic or otherwise. In recent days, some of us may have discovered things about our family members we wish we hadn't. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. This is heartbreaking. I do not want this menu item on my order. By the way, in Luke's gospel, it's even harsher. You have to hate family. What does Jesus mean? Well, he's acknowledging that while he didn't come to start wars, conflict will naturally occur among humans when some of them are really serious about following Jesus's way, because that way of life is countercultural. It's radical. It's anti-racist. If you've been paying attention to Jesus's ministry, you'll see he continually upends the status quo. This does not make him popular. So be alert. Be ready for anything. Just because you're a disciple and not a master doesn't mean you're exempt from the sort of persecution Jesus got. That is, if you're doing it right. Whoever does not take up the cross and follow me is not worthy of me, he says. Those who find their life spiritually will lose it physically. Those who lose their life physically will, for my sake, will find it spiritually. Yes, it's confusing and complicated. It's difficult and challenging. We don't want to select these hard teachings on our order of discipleship. But all Jesus is doing here is inviting us to go all in as his disciples and to be prepared for the consequences of living for justice and righteousness. Beloved siblings, we've been living in a time of not knowing what comes next. We have felt disoriented, confused, facing complicated choices. We've been enraged at the brutality we've seen at the hands of police and others, at the systemic racism that infects so many of our social institutions and communities, even the church. It's natural to feel off balance, disoriented, confused, upended. After all, Jesus seems to have a way of keeping us off balance, just exactly so we don't get set in our ways. We certainly have had to become resilient, creative, flexible these past few months. Has this helped us as followers of Jesus to become more open to whatever comes next? Because Jesus will surprise us. Jesus will upend our comfortable notions of what it means to love and follow him. Maybe our comfortable ways will be stripped away so that we have to force ourselves to be open to new ways to worship and learn and serve and be the church. So we'll be ready to acknowledge Jesus in ways we never knew we could before. So we'll be ready to tell in the light, proclaim from our housetops and from our streets that Jesus' way matters, the way of love, the way of justice and equality, the way of sacrificial service. Is that what's happened to us as we've struggled these past few months to make sense of our life and faith? Are we ready to get serious about Jesus now? As confusing and complicated and challenging as it may be, are we ready to check all of these options Jesus set forth in his teaching? May it be so. Amen.